Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Smart Rural Q&A session. This is Vicky Ayton. I'm the Business Development Manager for the CREST project. We are privileged today to have such a collection of experts all on one call, and I'm very grateful to them for the support they have shown the CREST webinar series, despite the circumstances we're currently in and some minor technical issues we have had. This week's session will run as a live Q&A, so slightly different to previous weeks. Just for those that are new to this webinar series, CREST stands for the Centre for Research into Environmental Science and Technology, and we are a European regional development funded R&D project, helping businesses and organisations in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin to develop new products, processes or services. We're usually physically based at a lovely location at University Centre Shrewsbury, or UCS for short, where we have our CREST lab and meeting rooms. UCS itself is a partnership between Shropshire Council and the University of Chester and was created to drive economic growth and higher level skills in a rural county. And so it makes sense that we keep a focus on the issues facing businesses and communities in the county in which we reside, much of which, as I've said, is rural. So if we can go to slide. On that note, if I can just move to slide 2 now, please. We do have some grants available through the Low Carbon Opportunities Programme, which is for Shropshire businesses only. So if you can go into that, you can see on that slide there's some information, and we will put a link in the chat, which hopefully you'll be able to see, to our CREST YouTube channel, which will give you some further information on the Low COP grant. So moving on now, so this is the third event in our Smart Rural series, and we're excited to announce that we're now planning a Smart Rural Transport event in collaboration with a number of key stakeholders for November 2020. So if you just register with CREST, you can receive updates on this event. So moving on to slide 3 now, please. So today's event has been split into 2 themes: digital and transport. So firstly, we're going to reflect on the previous digital Smart Rural products with a directed question for each of those speakers from myself, and then Q&A from the audience. We will then repeat this process with the last 3 speakers on transport, inviting attendees to drop questions into the chat at any time. So if we can stop sharing now, that'd be great. We really encourage anyone to ask questions throughout the event using the chat function. You can find the chat function in the middle of the screen towards the bottom, and you'll see a menu pop up. The chat button is a square box with lines on it to the right of 3 dots. Simply click on this and you'll be able to see the conversation on the right hand side and add your own questions here. Please tell us who the question is for, and you have the option to put your name or be anonymous. If we don't manage to answer all the questions today, please do drop us an email and we can respond to you after the event. So now if we can go over to the panel, and if each member of the panel could introduce themselves, please, beginning with Paul.
Hi, Paul Endop from Smart Rural Co-op. The talk I gave was about how we use the co-op as a vehicle to deliver digital connectivity from the outside in through collaboration and shared value. And just a reminder, there is no silver bullet, so we do have to collaborate.
Thank you. On to Tina.
Hi, my name is Tina Arnardóttir. I am currently a project manager for the University of Chester, but prior to that I worked for the Icelandic government as a sort of a rural development officer, and my talk was a bit of a case study example of rural development in Iceland and digital connectivity.
Thank you, Tina, and now on to Noman.
Hi, morning everybody. My name is Noman Novan. I work for Balfour Beatty as a digital construction lead for Northern Midlands region. My presentation was about smart rural, applying the concept of smart city. So smart cities have got different principles. So if we want to apply smart cities principle into smart rural, so what sort of a common grounds we have, and how can we implement those framework, those principles into smart rural?
Thanks, Noman. And on to Chris Taylor.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Chris Taylor. I look after the Connecting Shropshire programme, which is a intervention programme run by Shropshire Council, and we have a number of contracts that look at intervention into Shropshire to improve connectivity. So my talk was very much about that, talking generally about digital connectivity, and obviously today very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. And on to Stuart from Airband.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stuart. I work for Airband. I am the contact for the Shropshire area. We look at providing services, high-speed broadband services to businesses and residential customers across Shropshire and other areas in the UK.
Thanks, Stuart. And on to Juliana.
Sorry, I'm mute. I'm Juliana. I'm the director of Crest, so I oversee everything at Crest. My presentation was a talk, actually. It was a scene setter on digital connectivity and productivity and potentially what it means to Shropshire. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you. And on to Tracy. We can hear you, Tracy.
Oh, okay. Thank you. The symbol wasn't changing for some reason. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Saville. I work at the Connected Places Catapult. My presentation gave a brief summary about what we do to support innovation in transport and places, working across both supply and demand side. And as by way of a kind of a scene setter for the rural mobility webinar coming up later in the year that Vicky mentioned, I gave some examples of rural mobility innovations.
Thank you, Tracy. Now on to Valerie.
Thank you, Vicky. Excuse me, I'm Valerie from Midlands Connect, and my talk was around the future of rural mobility study that we did last year. That looked at the needs of communities and businesses within our rural areas right across the Midlands, from the Welsh border to the Lincolnshire coast, how we might address those needs. And came up with a framework of needs and a toolkit of options. So hopefully I'll get the chance to say a little bit more about that later, and I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. And last but not least, we have Leslie.
Hi, I'm Head of Communications and Stakeholder Engagement at West Midlands 5G. So I was asked to come along to give a bit of an overview of our programme, what our objectives are, what we're doing and what we've achieved so far. And I'm kind of interesting that we are obviously an urban project, but our perspective is in terms of use cases and capabilities that actually that does cross the rural and urban sectors. So yeah, pleased to give you an overview and happy to take questions today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So now if we can begin, we're going to just do like a directed question, a quick fire round of 6 questions, and then we're going to open up the floor for any Q&A from the audience. So please pop your questions into the chat at any time. So I'm going to start with Paul Lindup. So Paul, we've been chatting regularly as we began this conversation at probably about 12 months ago now. But I was going to ask you, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 has been upon rural areas, and how does this tie in with Smart Rural?
I suppose, yes, Vicky, as you well know, our conversation's been going for that time. We've been a little bit frustrated by, first of all, rain and then COVID. Getting to meet face to face, but it's actually quite a personal thing for us because I'm looking at moving house from the northeast of Scotland down to Shropshire, Cheshire area. And one of the things we've found as part of COVID is there is quite a strong drive for people to get out of cities at the moment. Trying to rent a property or buy a property is absolutely impossible. So are we seeing actually a reversal of urbanisation? All the other industrial revolutions have driven people into the cities. We may actually now be seeing a little bit of a nudge back. Now, all of us who've been working rural have been saying, oh, we need to stop depopulation. We're actually now facing something moving the other way, because if we do have people moving out of town, all that infrastructure that we're trying to put in place for digital and new mobility is going to be even more stressed. But schools and doctors, that supply is finite in rural as well. So there's a lot of things that are about to happen, or a plausible scenario is going to be tested, and that's deurbanisation. And one specific one that came up, I think, in our last conversation, Vicky, that I think people need to remember is Industry 1.0, the very first industrial revolution. One of the big activities that supported that was the provision of reservoirs in very rural areas and piping of water into cities. Now, if the people on the demand side are all going to move away from the cities out into the rural, can our old infrastructure, really old infrastructure, pre-digital, actually survive that?
It's actually a really interesting point, and as somebody who lives quite rurally and I'm quite aware of what the housing market's doing, it is quite interesting just seeing the response to what's happening at the moment. And I have some real empathy for people that are looking to go more rural with their families at the moment. I think we all do, but it's how do we handle it? What infrastructures might be required? I think it's quite an interesting point, and digital connectivity is really key for people who need to work from home and that perhaps were urban before. So yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's a really interesting point. We'll come back to that for the Q&A. I'm just going to move on now to Tina. So I've got a question for Tina. So Tina, your presentation was really fascinating and shared the sort of enterprising model that they use in Iceland for innovation. How do you think we can encourage sort of a more enterprising countryside in Shropshire and in rural areas?
I don't think there's like a simple answer, but I think one of the big drivers, I think, is connectivity and digital connectivity especially. And I think we'll see that now, like Paul was saying, following COVID, I think people are looking more at working remotely, and therefore I think this is going to become an ever-growing issue. So I think we really need to kind of make things happen very quickly now, I think. But I think in order to kind of encourage increased entrepreneurship, for example, you need also access to capital and to funding, and you need business development support and peer-to-peer support, which I think is sometimes forgotten. So I think there's a number of things that sort of come together to encourage entrepreneurial kind of an enterprising, if you like, countryside. But I think there's also opportunities for things like remote services, remote healthcare. These things are going to happen online a lot more now, I think, because like Paul was saying, there's not enough services everywhere, but people are wanting to perhaps move out of the cities. And there's going to be a lag between people wanting to move and the services in those areas catching up to that demand. And therefore, I think there's opportunity to come up with new ways of providing that service. So I think there's always opportunities in all these kind of circumstances, and that includes this pandemic, I think.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Yeah, I agree. It's not a simple answer, is it? But what can we do to move it forward is why we're here, I think. Which brings me on to Noman's. Hi, Noman. Noman, we chatted on LinkedIn, actually. We were talking previously about monetization of data, if I can even say it. So my question to you is, previously, you mentioned that monetization of data is a way of driving smart city investment. What data do you think could be monetized in a rural context?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think if we take a one step back and say, okay, what are the fundamental principles? Briefly, if we just look at the fundamental principle between the smart rural and the smart cities, the fundamental principles are the same. The cities are rural. They are based on the fundamental principles which are about living spaces for human being. So living spaces, whether they are in cities or whether they are in rural, so they are the same, and they are around human kinetics, human activities, human life. So, and this also links with the kind of the other element, which is supply and demand, which Paul gave an example for the dam and the pipework, taking the water from the dam and giving the supply to the needs. With the supply and demand, so the fundamental principles are the same. And when we look at the smart cities principles, there are multiple layers. At each layer, so you have a really good common ground between the smart cities and smart rural, but there isn't much of a difference. So the question around the monetization of the data, what type of data, I would say there isn't much of a difference between the cities and the rural. It will be pretty much the same, but there will be some key different elements, which are the special areas in the rural space areas where you have the different resources comparative to city resources. There will be some sort of a subtle differences between the data. But to me, I think the more I have researched into this topic more, and the more I understand this, so there isn't fundamentally much of a difference between the type of data. It will be around the supply and demand related to human kinetics, human life.
Okay, thank you, Noma, for that. So basically, there's not much difference in what we need to do. We just, as you say, the resources are different. So I'd be interested to understand that more, perhaps in the Q&A. Thank you very much. So that's going to take me now on to Chris Taylor. So Chris, hi. So
hello.
Hello, good morning. So one of the things we're just talking about data there. So the passage of data is key to many industries and relies on good digital connectivity. Do you think enough has been done to inform consumers, I'm talking about individuals and businesses here, on the choices available and costs for these new technologies? For example, broadband versus mobile and other less known technologies?
I think it's a really interesting point, and I think communication is very difficult in the changing world of communications. So I think, you know, the responsibility of getting that communication right and articulating maybe what is available and how much things costs, particularly in the current climate, falls, I suppose, between two areas really. I mean, nationally, I think probably, you know, the big providers will see it as a commercial aspect and offering those services. And as is always the case, I think with digital, you'll have the early adopters that will know all about it and the opportunities that are available to them. And then I think you've got the more localized aspect, probably where we come into the equation as providers of intervention, where, you know, we can do and do currently provide different channels of communication about what is available. I think the key aspect is that digital is constantly evolving. So whilst we were probably talking when the programme started in 2013 about superfast broadband, which may not have meant much to many people, we're now talking about gigabit capable broadband, and to lots of people, you know, just that terminology doesn't really mean much. You know, people just want things to work. It's a bit similar to me trying to get on the conference this morning, you know, just wanting to click on a button and the thing to work. It doesn't always happen that way, and I think you know, locally we have a responsibility to try and make things easier for our constituents, and we try to do that. But you know, as is always the case, technology will continue to evolve, and it's down to educating people as best we can.
Okay, thank you, Chris. That leads in really nicely to a question for Stuart. So Stuart, can you sort of explain to us how Airband fits into these options from a consumer point of view?
Of course. I mean, it's interesting what Chris says. I mean, we all appreciate the slow internet speeds that can be so frustrating, especially as we are moving online. I mean, in fact, a recent article in Shropshire Star highlighted over, I think it was 1,800 premises still unable to gain access to superfast broadband. And that does not include rural locations. So the figure is way much higher. And this is where we do fit in. I mean, we give consumers a choice. and choice to choose what is best for them. I mean, firstly, because using one of Airband's various technologies, we can provide fast internet into hard to reach areas where they need it, where BT and Openreach can't achieve this. And unlike other providers, we use our own independent network and infrastructure. I mean, at present, we've got in excess of 38,000 premises across our current network. And in Shropshire alone, we have such an extensive wireless network with hundreds of masts. And the next phase is to bring in fibre to bring the gigabit opportunities for the rural locations. I mean, then they've got the opportunity to maximise the productivity in this digital age for businesses and consumers, with all the benefits that brings cloud services, digital marketing, etc. It also gives the flexibility for people to work remotely, as we're all enjoying at present, which can allow for improved productivity, reduced overheads, and also reducing the environmental impact, but because of less commuting. But also for consumers, not only do they get the speeds they need, demand for doing whatever they want, downloading, streaming, video conferencing, well, we can carry on and on for that, but it's also the access to the e-commerce businesses, the microeconomies, not just the major companies, the ones that are set up at home, whether they've diversified from the business they're doing on their farms to other aspects. And these people and businesses, they work from home and they need the fast broadband in rural areas. And this enables people to not just have the choice, but to remain local, meaning communities are able to connect and grow and provide sustainability to rural towns.
Thanks, Stuart. That's a nice overview there of some of the benefits of good connectivity, and it was just interesting to see. It does feel still like a bit of a puzzle, all the options that are available and choosing the best option for where you live, which might be a combination of different technologies. So I still think there's a piece of work to be done there, explaining that for people. So thank you, Stuart. I'm just going to move on now to Juliana. So Juliana was taking a slightly different angle here and thinking about individuals. So is digital connectivity part of the puzzle for reducing outward migration to cities? How do we encourage individuals to stay or move to rural areas to ensure we have an adequate, appropriately skilled labour force?
Okay, so the first one, and it is personal. I think that digital connectivity, I mean, of course, it's part of the puzzle for reducing outward migration to cities. However, taking to the points that have been said this morning, and to actually do that, I guess we need to ensure that sufficient investment is made in developing a sustainable infrastructure in rural areas, and we need to consider which aspects of infrastructure demand needs to be given immediate and priority attention. So, for example, is broadband the major consideration, or are physical connections more important? I also think that we need to consider how the social, environmental and economic interdependencies, so the sustainable interdependencies of rural and urban areas, contribute to regional integration, and also what regional variations need to be taken into account. And then finally, look at the specific strategies, which I know Shropshire Council are doing, for improving digital infrastructure, not just in Shropshire, but in the UK countryside, that are required to develop innovative solutions that will address any problems of connectivity, to keep individuals in the countryside, or to bring individuals into the countryside, or to encourage individuals to move to much more rural areas. Just remind me what the second point was, second question.
So how do we encourage individuals to stay or move to rural areas to ensure we have in our county an appropriately skilled labour force?
Okay. So I guess I covered a bit of that in there, sorry. So I guess one of the issues in rural areas is the ageing population, which again has been mentioned, along with the departure of the young to cities, in effect. So if I'm thinking of a skilled labour force, and in particular, just take land-based, so farmers, I think the average age, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, of UK farmers is about 59, which raises the question about where the workers of the future are going to come from and how they can be sustained, supported and upskilled in this industry or in our county. Okay, the UK's industrial strategy a couple of years ago identified that developing skills was the key aspiration. I guess we need to ensure that Shropshire as a county, as a rural area, is given the specific attention that it requires to fulfil the aim of the strategy. So going back to farmers, how might older farmers, for example, and I know 59 isn't old, but how might older farmers be supported into retirement so that younger people can be encouraged to take up the opportunities in the land-based sector to ensure that we retain not only the skilled labour force that's needed in the county, but to encourage more to come in. And therefore, thinking about the whole infrastructure, do we therefore need to consider the specific housing needs, be doctors, farmers, and offer them priority for social housing or subsidies? Do community facilities, going back to what Noman said, and also what Paul has said, where I live, there's no shop, there's no post office, there's no bus stop, there's no pub. I think if we're going to encourage people to come and move to rural areas and encourage that skilled labour force, we need to think about the infrastructure, but most importantly, I guess, we need to think about good connectivity to ensure we retain the skills needed, because I know for sure I don't have it in North Shropshire. Does that answer the question, Vicky?
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Juliana, very much. Okay, so thank you everybody for answering those direct questions. We're now going to move on to the Q&A. So if anybody watching would like to submit a question, please use the chat function. And Kat Bevan, who is part of the Crest project team, is going to go through some of those questions now with the panel. Are you there, Kat?
Yes, I'm here. Hi everybody. So we've got a few questions that have come in for the panel. The first one is for Chris Taylor, and it's a question asking what 5G projects are coming up in Shropshire in 2020?
Okay, yes, so 5G is, I suppose, on the lips of most. Lots of expectations, I think, around the general connectivity around 5G and what it potentially offers. And I think a key part of 5G, beyond obviously an expectation for people just to get faster connections through their mobile phones, and that will definitely be driving the commercial industry, just an upgrade of the existing 4G infrastructure. 5G offers lots of other opportunities, particularly around connected devices. So Shropshire Council, obviously, over a period of time, has been very interested to see what potentially that could look like from a project perspective. So the Department of Culture, or Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, over a period of time, have been running some trials programs because they, as a government, want to understand what the economic benefits could be from 5G. So Shropshire Council did submit, along with some other partners, into a bid as part of that programme, and we were successful probably around about March time. So that we have a project now that's currently mobilising, has been mobilising since April. That's with a number of partners that include Airband, include the Mobile Network Operator 3. It includes partners across in Worcestershire and Herefordshire as part of their the CCG, which is looking very much at the digital health opportunities around 5G. So we will be building a small network around the areas south of Ludlow across into Worcestershire around Tenbury Wells, and that will be very much looking to try and understand how we can deploy a 5G network in a rural area using existing assets, predominantly those that have already been built with Airband. And then what we will actually do is we will test what that 5G network can provide from an assistive technology perspective, particularly around health user case is. So we'll be looking very much at potentially doing some remote consultations for GP surgeries, etc., and care homes. So it's I think a very interesting project. I would emphasise again, this is just a test and research programme. This isn't about a commercial deployment of 5G, but it will give us that opportunity to understand what the economic and social opportunities will be for 5G. Beyond that, we're currently looking potentially at another project. We see that there are some other calls, competitive calls at the moment for 5G tests and trials in addition to this one. And I think we will continue to do that as a local authority. I think it's really important that we take all the opportunities as key stakeholders in Shropshire to understand what it can potentially do for our communities.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like you've got quite a lot going on. Thank you very much. The second question is from Dr. Steve Bristow, and he is a trustee of the Lineal Trust, which is a charity based on the Llangollen Canal, which provides canal boat holidays for people with disabilities and illness and injury. And his question is actually for everybody, but maybe Paul, if you could start off with trying to answer it. And the question is, what conversations, if any, have you had or do you plan to have with Canals Rivers Trust, boat hire companies and canal side businesses about their specific needs for smart technologies over the next couple of decades? So,
extremely live. I'm not sure. I think Steve can probably remember when we did a talk. One of the groups we're talking to in Scotland is Scottish Canals, and that's principally from their end. It was around the management of their infrastructure and the nature of the reservoirs that they have to supply the water. We've also sort of expanded the conversation into, I think, the sort of things that Steve's looking at there around the actual use of the canal, and that's the towpath, etc. Funnily enough, I've got my fingers crossed, but just to let Steve know, I will be a mile away from the Llangollen Canal if I get the rental house I'm trying to get. So I will be very definitely having a conversation, because I like to run kit from the home, and that's an ideal one for us, hopefully, to have that conversation. But I think from our perspective, the kit is there and the technology to do most things, monitoring where the boats are, how they're working, people on the canal side, level of water, quality of water, all those things are doable now. It's really having a conversation with Steve, CRT and the users to say, right, what do you want the technology to do for you, rather than trying to find a use for the technology, sort of sell the technology. It's around what's the value, what can we help, question can we help you answer.
Okay, great, thank you. Chris, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that. Sorry to surprise. Oh, I think you're muted, Chris.
Back on it?
Yep.
Double click, sorry. So no, I think it's certainly an area. I mean, connected devices, absolutely, monitoring environmental aspects. I think all of those resonate particularly well around the 5G technologies, and you know, I think we saw, particularly around the flooding quite recently, the absolute need, perhaps, that we have, you know, opportunities within that environmental space to use technology. I think Paul's absolutely right. You know, I think technology can answer most things. I think it's really about the scale of it. I think too often, and it's a really important point, that we just assume technology is the answer and we will build the technology. I think you have to really get the focus on outcomes. I think too often we are driven down just assuming that the technology will deliver the benefits, and I think that's probably where programs and projects potentially do miss the focus. So I think you know, there would definitely be some opportunities in that space. As I said, we're certainly at this moment in time thinking creatively about some opportunities, which I think possibly may touch upon some of those things.
That's great, thank you. I don't know if anybody else has got anything to add on that. Nope. That's okay, if not. Just thought I would check. We've had a question in from John Beer, and this might be something that other people are interested in. And he's just asked if Valerie, if it's possible, if you can send out a copy of the mobility study. I know you have answered it in the chat, but if you could just do it verbally as well for the video.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Anybody who wants to study, please email me. I'm very happy to send documents to them. So my email address is Valerie, VALERIE, Hastie, HASTIE, that's all one word, Valerie Hastie at midlandsconnect.uk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Valerie. And we can send it out to send your email address out to people who've registered as well.
Kat?
Super,
Yeah.
thank you.
Kat, it's Chris here. Can
Hi,
I
Chris.
just possibly just add something to that? Certainly I think it's really interesting the work that Valerie's been undertaking. I just wanted to add to that you know, Shropshire Council fully understands that rural mobility is an absolute critical component of a wider rural strategy, and that is work that is underway, and I think that fits very well around the digital aspects. I mean, infrastructure generically, the two really do go hand in hand, and again I think there's some further work that we're currently looking to commission around some of that subject matter, and you know, I certainly see that you know, that there is a relationship being built across, obviously, with Midlands Connect, which will hopefully again bring us some further long-term strategic opportunities.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. I realised, yeah, that was a mobility question, which is actually the second part of the webinar, isn't it? But so sorry, Valerie, brought you in a bit early. So moving on, we've got a point from Andrew Sterling. And he's put, one thing that he's seen is growing demand for help for seniors living in isolated rural locations who hadn't woken up to the need for broadband until now. And they've put some thought into the design of digital helper packs, including device and connectivity and help via the phone. I know Paul and Chris, you sort of replied to that. So Paul, what was your comment or your reply to Andrew?
I think sort of in the conversations we have about sort of rural Scotland and connectivity, there's always characters that appear, whether they be 59-year-old farmers, and I'll get Juliana back for that later, or some of the very independent people that you find living in rural. And we have an archetype called Granny up the Glen. And if we think about Granny who wants to live independently in that very low energy efficient house, well off the beaten track for BT and Openreach, we're thinking, okay, what can we do to help? So that, I think there are quite a few things we can do with the low technology, but I think, as Chris pointed out, with the move to video triage and things like this, eventually it's going to have to the high bandwidth is going to have to catch up. But there is a bit of a short-term safety net that we can do with LoRaWAN, that when eventually PSTN is taken away, we can do something and Granny doesn't have to sign up for broadband to get it. So it's something we're very conscious of.
Yeah, no, definitely, it's definitely sort of being highlighted, isn't it? Especially at the moment, I suppose. Yeah, that's great. Chris, I know you did also reply to that, but I'm just a little bit conscious of time, so I might ask you another question, if that's okay, which you've also replied to on the chat, which is from Paul Williams, who says, do the panel view the amended electronic communications code as helping or hindering digital connectivity? So Chris, if you want to start on that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the code was very much amended, I suppose, to try and make it easier to get digital infrastructure deployed into rural areas, and obviously, you know, costs associated with some of that equipment and building masts was very much part of the agenda, but unfortunately it's kind of had a slight reversal of effect in that, you know, you have ended up with possibly the mobile network operators in a more favourable position than the land owners, which was the absolute reverse prior to the code coming in. And I think it's just really turned the scale on the arguments. So the arguments are still there, but they're being positioned from a different side. So, you know, it's not an area that we get ourselves involved in. What I would say is, as a local authority, I think it's really important that you have sensible conversations conversations. At the end of the day, getting infrastructure for the reasons that we just talked about on the previous question out into rural areas is to benefit communities. So we need to have land agents and particularly landowners who are open to sensible conversations to benefit communities. I think too often, and certainly my experience has been, that we've had situations created where it's been monetized, and I think we need people to look at it on a grander scale, and that's not just possibly around the financial rewards, but it's the social rewards, and there has to be an appreciation. If you're going to put a mast up in an area of outstanding natural beauty, it's being put up there to the benefit of the community and give them better connectivity for all the things that we've been talking about this morning. So, to have then objections around the visualization of that equipment, I think has to be put into context. So, I think there's two really important points there. It's about working with those communities. So, in all cases, we try and put our foot slightly in the door with those conversations, whether that's through our local elected members or whether that's through parish councils, to try and engender a sensible dialogue to get the benefits to the communities.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I know there are a few more questions, but I know, Paul, you've answered one on the chat, but there's one that no one's answered, so I might ask that and see if anyone has got an answer and make this the last question of this section. I don't know if anyone's got an answer for this. The state of education at all levels is a key barrier to rural growth. Rural areas have suffered with limited funding from successive governments, leading to poor aspirations. This is a key issue, and does the panel believe the government understands the problems and opportunities? I don't know if anybody wants to have a go at that one.
I'll talk very briefly about some of the work that we've been doing, if that's okay. So some of the needs that we discovered in the Future of Rural Mobility work was around access to key services. So that obviously includes education. Generally it takes rural residents approximately twice as long as urban residents to get to key services such as hospitals and education facilities. So there is a barrier there. All of the work that we've done has been shared with DFT colleagues, and they've welcomed it with open arms. So that part of government is certainly aware of rural issues relating to the environment. The environment. I'm reading another question there. Sorry, to education. So that's probably all I can say on the matter. But that's our two penneth. Thank you.
No, that's useful. Thank you, Valerie. If there's anybody else, or if not, I will hand back to Vicky to carry on the next bit.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks, Kat. So back to me now for a bit. So thanks everybody for those questions and to Kat. And now we move on to consider the relationship between digital connectivity, mobility and transport for rural areas. What has been made really clear to me through these webinars is how key digital infrastructure is to unlocking economic growth and sustainable communities for rural areas. Much of the proposed innovation I've heard about relies on good digital connectivity. What will be interesting to see unfold is whether those moving out from cities to rural areas will stay if connectivity is patchy. Will it impact on where they choose to live? Will villages with full fibre or 5G become more sustainable than those without? What industries could emerge or grow? What new jobs could be created? Is transport now just as important in the future as digital connectivity, from an investment sort of point of view? So with that in mind, my first question is for Tracy Saville of Connected Places Catapult. Morning, Tracy.
Hiya.
In relation to rural transport, one thing we haven't really ever touched on is what part does rail have to play in this jigsaw puzzle of rural mobility?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, rail in rural areas provides, many of the same benefits it provides in non-rural areas. So, for example, it's a more sustainable mode of transport. It enables people to travel greater distances. And as Valerie's just highlighted, in rural areas, often there they're quite carbon intensive in that more people are driving and driving further to get to essential services and to work than in urban areas. So I see a huge opportunity for rail. But something really important about this, I'm not sure that very many journeys in the UK only involve catching a train. Almost every single rail journey in the UK is multimodal. It requires those connections to being able to use a bike or to have good physical infrastructure around walking routes and parking. And on-demand services. We're increasingly seeing on-demand services in cities around renting bikes and e-bikes, for example. And to Paul's point right at the beginning around demand might be rising as we get towards deurbanisation following COVID. That's actually a bit of an opportunity, I would say, because we have a wealth of mobility providers entering more urban markets, but it can be quite challenging to create sustainable businesses for those mobility services in rural areas. So, we might start seeing, hopefully we will, a greater surge of innovators coming into rural areas.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah. So, so I think one of the other issues with rail perhaps being rural is getting to your local train station is where it sort of falls down for me. The public, getting on the bus is not at the right time to connect to the train to get to Shrewsbury. So I was working out the other day, I was laughing because I wanted to catch the train in recently, and it would have taken 3 hours. It would have taken, as opposed to an hour's drive. So it would be really great if we can see some movement at some point in how this all connects up. Which takes me on to a question for Valerie. Thank you very much, Tracy. So on to Valerie. So rail forms part of the Future of Rural Mobility Toolkit produced by Midlands Connect. What do you think, or what do you consider to be the next steps to move this work forward, Valerie?
Thanks, Vicky. So many links to what previous speakers have been saying, so I'll come back to that. But in terms of what next for us, as I said before, we've produced the framework of rural needs and the toolkit of options. One of the key recommendations within the study that was looked at in the toolkit is the provision of hubs. So phase 2 for us is looking into hubs, sort of characteristics for locations where hubs might be most possible, viable. So that piece of work is subject to an invitation to quote currently. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be awarding that piece of work. The study then will be looking at those characteristics, so looking at the likes of demographics, existing transport, existing service provision, what the needs are from that local community and where they want to link up to and why, for what services, what provision. And then a set of guidance for local authorities, community groups and others to then take forward in terms of considering whether they would like to provide hubs and where they might be best placed. So hopefully that will be completed by the end of the calendar year, and we'll then obviously look to share those results and guidance, because we would like other organisations to take that work forward. And in terms of what others have been saying, I noted, Chris, you were talking about assistive technologies and remote health consultations. Brilliant. We considered those in our study, and the need for that kind of technology to help our rural communities be more sustainable. And we are working with Shropshire Council still. A couple of your colleagues have offered to help on the project board for this next stage of work, which is brilliant. So they'll be working alongside colleagues from Worcestershire and Lincolnshire as well, which is great, and Herefordshire. We also looked obviously at provision of services that Juliana mentioned, and how people actually access those services. Can we take services to people, for example, in hubs, rather than expecting people to go to services such as hospital appointments, GP appointments and so And then latterly, Tracy, you were talking about rail and connecting to rail, and Vicky about how you get to train services. Again, rural last mile was a real issue that came out of our study, and how people, make that last mile of their rural journey, and the fact that it's usually substantially longer than a mile. And from my personal perspective, living in a market town in Shropshire, I'm in the town, but I can't get a local bus to get to the train station in time to get into Birmingham for my normal commute when things were normal. I wouldn't get into the office until about 9:30, 10 o'clock. I didn't even look at getting home again. So we need to look at all of those links. So while Midlands Connect focuses on the strategic links, that's our sort of bread and butter work, if you like, we are working with partners to address those more local links as well.
That all sounds really positive. Just with the sustainable hat on, I really hope at some point that I will not be driving to work. That is my goal, that eventually when we're back in the office, I will be able to use public transport or ride my bike. But yes, so thank you for sharing all of that. It's nice to hear something really positive on the horizon at the moment as well. So thank you, Valerie. So I've got a question now for Leslie. So Leslie, bringing us back to sort of the digital connectivity theme. In relation to 5G and transport, what are the implications for rural areas from a West Midlands 5G perspective?
Well, as a general perspective, let me answer that first, because I think it has implications both in terms of urban and rural. And I think, transport, the world of transport, I was going to say was changing and significantly impacted by COVID, and the implications for that. Perhaps, we're looking at it in the context of, do we need to look at travel from a need to travel as opposed to a right to travel? But we think there are kind of three key things. One is ensuring that transport options are fully optimised to enable economic mobility. And what we mean by that is COVID is going to have a significant impact on employment, and particularly unemployment, and a significant impact on businesses and organisations in how how they conduct their business. So actually we want transport to be optimised so that there are options for people might need to travel further or differently in terms of getting work, and organisations might have to have different business models that rely on different forms of transport. So that's one thing. I think the other one, which is quite obvious, is on ensuring transport is safe. Whether that's social distancing or whether it's cleaning regimes. There's going to be a lot of different things to think about for travel. And then the third one is, and I think this is where it doesn't really matter whether it's urban or rural, is having real-time data to inform better journey planning. What I mean by that is, we might want to travel and consider, like say, back to the social distancing, we might be able to plan our journey time differently for different reasons. There also might be different job patterns, like you say, there might be a lot more working from home, or there might be a lot more kind of not wanting to go on a train at the usual busy, congested times previously. There might be other factors. So having 5G would really kind of like real-time data would make it significantly important. But so it's the informing decision making, and you say about the rural side of things. Again, that type of information is important. When you need to travel, you need to make sure it's at the right time, what's available, etc. And I think also, I think it's been touched on by a few others, but in terms of actually perhaps making an assumption about connectivity, I was kind of, my eyes were opened in that we think about people not having connectivity, but actually if more of us are working from home, then actually in a family or in a business unit, there's a much more demand in that one place as opposed to there was before. And also in terms of, equipment, there might be one laptop that you're trying to educate, you're trying to run a business, you're trying to work from home. And I think that's why that links to transport is actually working from home. We're seeing already, and I think the trend is that that's going to continue. So sorry, a bit of a rambling answer. I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you, Leslie. I think you covered quite a lot of points there, and actually a lot of that resonated with me. You know, availability of bandwidth when everybody's streaming has been an issue. Availability of laptops when you have children to homeschool. You know, these are real sort of social economic barriers at the moment. And sorry, my phone keeps going. So all these social economic barriers are very real for everybody at the moment. And you know, what do you do if you can't afford full fibre broadband? You know, that's a reality for a lot of people who are living off food banks at the moment. How do you get online to educate your children and pick up the primary curriculum? You know, I think all these things are going to have a long-term effect, and there's a real need to look at sort of equality of access to digital infrastructure and equality. It brings it all back to equality again for me, and I feel a bit like being rural does, you know, it does reduce those opportunities sometimes. So thank you very much, Leslie, I appreciate that. So thank you for all those answers. So we're going to go back to the chat now. I've got Kat there. So Kat, have we got any questions in the chat for the speakers?
Yeah, we've got a couple. And this first one has possibly sort of been touched on a little bit in your answers, but I'll ask it. And it's from Richard Lumby, who says, what thoughts do the panel have? And I'm sort of thinking Tracy, Valerie or Leslie. What thoughts do you have on the provision of sustainable public transport in a rural setting, and whether there are developments to use smart technology to make this efficient, economic, flexible and demand-led? I don't know if you've got anything extra to add onto that. Any of you?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are some startups starting to emerge actually that are trying to better help people share journeys. So we all know there are Facebook groups in many communities to enable ride sharing. So I think one I spoke at the last the webinar I did was around LiveShare, that basically is a kind of a digital platform for helping to connect people going on the same journeys. There's also one called Moses Mobility that's started, I think, last year, possibly, where whilst you're on your journey, so your train journey, you can actually identify whether someone else on that train might be possibly able to share a journey with you. So there are some things certainly emerging, but I would say we've probably got quite a way to go in that rural mobility. You know, it's great that we're having so many conversations about it now, and in particular relation to innovation, but we're some way behind urban developments for somewhat obvious reasons.
Yeah, I agree. That's interesting. I hadn't heard about the one on the train, so that's interesting. Leslie or Valerie, have you got anything to add to that?
Yes, I'll chip in. Excuse me. So access to public transport was obviously a big part of our study as well, and obviously very conscious of the fact that a lot of people don't have access to modern tech and modern communications. So alongside apps and so on, where people can book demand responsive transport to link them to public transport and so on, we're also aware of the fact that we need to provide more traditional communications, if you like, letting people know when there's been a bus timetable change, that kind of thing. So really, from our perspective as a subnational transport body, we're working with our partners in the local authorities and elsewhere to try and support public transport in our rural areas. We know it is an issue.
Do you want me to comment as well? I mean, I think,
yeah, if you could, that would be brilliant, Leslie. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was just conscious that we are an urban connected communities project, so we aren't rural. However, that means that it's back to that old chestnut. If we're looking at your use case and there's applicability across the piece, then there's, you know, there's benefits in sharing lessons learned. So our remit is kind of trying to make public transport particularly desirable, whether that's by means of information, whether that's by means of passenger transport. And we've just released, we've just closed a competition actually for some projects with funding available. They closed a week ago. So I suppose I'm not answering the question at all, but watch this space in terms of what projects come forward.
Well, that sounds very interesting. Thank you. Thanks, Leslie, for jumping in. We'll keep updated with what you're up to. I've just got a final point from Steve Bristow, and it's not particularly a question, it's a comment, but I'll read it out. And it's directed to Paul Linder, but it might be that other people are also interested in getting involved. Steve's just saying about the Canal and River Trust having a number of smart installations such as sluices and gauges, linked together via Vodafone's M2M global platform, and some boat owners use GPS tracking systems fairly extensively. However, most of the canal network isn't very well served by 3G or 4G connectivity and is unlikely to be provided for by 5G. This has a direct impact on future tourism opportunities as more and more families, often younger families, require internet connectivity for their well-being, which is one of CRT's principal objectives. Of course, for many others, smart technologies are the last thing they want, choosing canal holidays precisely to get away from it all. And Steve is part of a CRT group looking at developments in green-blue futures for inland waterways in Europe, and he's happy to share some of his work. I know, Paul, you put your email there for Steve to contact you, but if anybody else is interested in hearing what Steve's up to, then you can connect with us and we can connect you together. So we can share Steve's email with you. And I think that is the end of the questions for the mobility section, as far as I can see. So thank you for the questions that have come in, and then back to you, Vicky.
Okay, thank you, everybody. There's a lot of food for thought going on here. My mind's whizzing around. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. It's really good to have some of these discussions at the moment. As we are getting close towards the end of the event, before we close, I'm just going to hand over to our CREST Research Director, Professor Juliana Powell-Turner, or Juliana for short, for her reflections on this smart rural digital theme and what our next steps are.
Okay, so yeah, really quick one from me. Thank you all for joining us for our weekly webinars on digital connectivity over the last 8 weeks. We seem to have been going for quite some time. As I said at the beginning, it seems a little ironic talking about digital connectivity in rural areas when many rural areas struggle to get online due to a lack of infrastructure or a resilient service, or simply don't have broadband, which I think Fiona Williams in week 4 drew to our attention down in the south of the county. I think bearing in mind most of us have been working from home for the last, is it 10 weeks, might be 11 weeks. We've all realised that we need a resilient way to continue to work and communicate with family and friends, with the aim of trying to go about our daily lives, and hopefully we'll all do things differently when lockdown reduces even further. Our speakers have covered a whole raft of material. Have we still come back to the challenge of being better connected? No man talked about, in cities where many people live together in the smallest of spaces, whereas in rural areas people tend to bridge the distance so they feel connected. So I guess to try and find solutions to some of these issues, we've looked at quite a few solutions over the last 8 weeks for integrating mobility and logistics with smart technology. That's been covered a couple of times to create a sense of place for people who live there. And I guess it's critical because I think Fiona said something about DEFRA's 2011 rural classification, that many of our rural communities still fall into the worst 10% of areas in the UK across all metrics, including download speed and super fast availability. I'm sure Chris will tell me that's all changing, and hopefully it is. But this is, I guess it's compounded by intermittent mobile signal, and I've just been told that my signal's not great from one of my colleagues. So I guess we're going to try and work around and make remote working, learning and keeping in touch, or it could make it more difficult. And I said it certainly is in North Shropshire where I'm living, and now is a prime example. So I guess to summarise, I think the last 8 weeks have opened up that technology is really improving and that initiatives are taking place. We've had some great work from Valerie and Tracy and Chris and Leslie, what's going on, and productivity seems to have continued despite the lack of access to a resilient connection in many areas. Paul highlighted about the Scottish Cooperative Initiative, which is delivering, you know, a true outside in rural digital connectivity to allow technology to deliver improvements for residents and businesses, and that nowhere's too rural. So hopefully, Paul, when you move down to Shropshire, you'll help us as well in what you've achieved up in Scotland. And I guess from what we've heard and learned from all the speakers is that we are taking real steps to improve our communication technologies, as well as understanding the benefits that it can bring to rural businesses and communities. So, you know, technology is just one aspect. You've got the environment, agriculture, education, retail and transport. And as Vicky has said, transport and mobility will be the focus for the next Smart Rural event, where I'm hoping that even that can be improved through the deployment of future ICTing and maybe community-led action and projects between now and then, but I'll let Vicky say more about that. So I just want to personally say that thank you very much to Paul, Tina, Noman, Chris, Stuart, Tracy, Valerie and Leslie for a set of excellent presentations over the last few weeks, and also a big thank you to Team Crest, and in particular Vicky, Kat and Pascal for all their hard work and what they've done behind the scenes on Sunday evenings. So that's all from me. Thank you ever so much. And I look forward to meeting you all face to face.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Yeah, no, I echo those comments. So now it just, I've got one more slide to share, which is just about how you can get in contact with Crest. We are a little bit ahead of schedule. We've got 4 minutes left. So if there's any closing comments from any of the presenters, anything anybody would like to say at this moment?
Hello. Vicky.
No, I was just going to say, Chris, do you want to come back on?
Yeah, I just did. I did, and I think that the reason I just wanted to, and it's not being protective over what we've done in the programme, but I think it's really quite important that there's a bit of context set here. So if you think where we are in the current crisis, in 2013, when the programme started, 24% of Shropshire had superfast broadband. We're now around about 93%. We've come a hell of a long way, and I think the fact that the programme has not been inundated with lots of issues over the last 10 weeks about connectivity. I think sometimes it's about perception. There is a perception that connectivity is poor across Shropshire, and in a lot of cases, I mean, I'll give you a good illustration this morning. Somebody contacted me, actually a colleague at Shropshire, saying how poor his broadband was, and he lived in Baschurch, not a terribly rural area, one of our villages, and he was getting under 4 megabits. Now, the only reason he was getting 4 megabits was because he'd never upgraded to superfast broadband, and he could take 80 megabits. So very often this is about a perception that the broadband is not good in an area when people don't actually know what the options are. So I think sometimes it's about getting that message out and getting people educated, and comes back to the question that I was actually asked, I think, at the start, how do we get people educated? Well, sometimes they've got to ask the question in the first place. We can't necessarily just plug that message all the time. We do that constantly, and sometimes we're criticised for saying that it's available, and somebody puts their hand up and says it's not available. Well, actually it is available. It's just that you haven't looked to upgrade. So I would always implore anybody who's on this call, if you have a problem with your connectivity, there will be a solution for you. And whether that's through a partner such as Airband, whether that's through a different provider, or whether it may be through a 4G LTE solution, there are solutions already out there. So always ask a question.
I think I'd have to agree with Chris on that, on various counts. Education is paramount, but also that people don't realise what they've got, and they're also misled by other people. So you need to educate them. There are genuine services out there, and not just some companies that will missell. You should explore what there is available.
Just if anyone would like to signpost to a resource that captures everything, I've seen lots of separate websites. So just, I think that's perhaps an action for us to take away, is that maybe there's a piece of work to be done there. I know you're already doing a lot at Shropshire Council to communicate. Maybe we can support you in any way we can support you, Chris, we will. So, you know, if there's something there about how do we communicate and help you, then we will. Signposting to additional information and making sure we make use of our networks on your behalf to get some information out there.
No, I think that's a really good point. You know, and particularly around the 5G, I think there's more that we can do with you as the university. I think there's a whole education piece around that, where, you know, we don't necessarily have the resources, and I know West Midlands Combined Authority, you know, it's really about educating and communicating, and I think there's some stuff that we can do around that. So that's definitely talk.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to have to be done in print, which is not very sustainable. Just. But there you go, because we can't get to everybody via the internet, can we, at the moment, or good old phone call. So yeah, any other closing comments? Nope. Okay, lovely. Right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm just going to share the last slide for me. So hopefully everybody can see this now. So this is just a thank you to everybody for attending. So this is the final webinar in our series. You can catch up on all the presentations via our YouTube channel. So if you just search Crest Smart Rural on YouTube, and it should bring it up. We will upload a recording of today's presentation as well, once we've had a chance to look back on it over it. You can always get in contact with us via email or Twitter. And please do join us for our next series, or we're not sure what format it will take yet, but in November we're going to do a deeper dive into transport and mobility for rural areas. And that's it for today. Thank you very much, everybody. We're bang on time. I look forward to connecting with you all offline soon, and have a lovely day. So thank you.
Thank you.